Let's get it. Let's get another postseason review. We are on. Hey guys, how you going? So down BKR Sport. We are live as today we are going to be going over the St. George Illawarra Dragons, who I believe, based off of kind of my just before even looking at the analytics and the statistics of the season and the ladder positionings and all that sort of stuff, well, not the ladder positionings, but, you know, looking across the competition just based off of us watching the games and watching these teams play, I feel like it's an extremely harsh position for the St. George Illawarra Dragons, you know, especially considering that 4 or 5 weeks before finals, there was like a slither of hope, and yet for them to get into the finals, and then it completely dropped off, like completely dropped off. And when I think of the St. George Illawarra Dragons off the top of my head in 2025, I just feel like it is a super harsh finish for them. Now, look, at the end of the day, and this is just kind of an intro before we do get quickly into the chat before we continue, but look, at the end of the day, this is where they finish, but it's just off the top of my head. It doesn't actually quite compute for me. You know, because truly I do believe they were better across more of the season in a lot of aspects than what we saw from teams that were slightly above them. So, look, it's quite interesting. I feel like today is going to be a very interesting postseason recap where we are going to go through the ladder this year. We're going to talk about their points, their against, their points differential, their home wins and their away wins. We're going to be comparing it to previous years of their team and then against other teams in their similar position, just to see how how good or bad they were comparatively to what the team in third last usually is. We're going to go through the signings they had this year and the losses, plus also the signings and losses for next season onwards, go through the contracts, go through the players, and pretty much everything in between. And that's why we're doing it live stream this year around. Usually we do our postseason reviews where we put out a video where people can comment, but I like to keep you guys interactive. I like you guys to be there throughout the process and throughout the journey. So that's why we are jumping on live. Now, last Friday, we put out the Newcastle Knights postseason review. We already did the Gold Coast Titans postseason review yesterday. As I said, today is the St. George Illawarra Dragons. Tomorrow, we'll be live at the South Sydney Rabbitohs. Then on Thursday, will be the West Tigers before we are obviously going to be live for a massive prelim between the Melbourne Storm and the Cronulla Sharks. Then on Saturday, we will have the North Queensland Cowboys. Sunday, we've got a massive live stream as the Brisbane Broncos play host to the Penrith Panthers in the other preliminary final. And then so on next week, Monday through till Saturday, we'll be just doing live streams of these postseason reviews. And obviously, it is in reverse order. And then once it does get into these top 8 teams, it'll be in reverse order, inclusive of where they did actually get knocked out. Right, so for example, the Panthers there finished in 7th. We're not going to go straight from the Roosters to Panthers because, one, we might not be able to do that. If they lose to the Broncos this week, then I sure would be able to do that. But no, we would be having the Roosters and the Warriors followed by the Bulldogs and the Raiders. You get the drill, right? So, look, it's a really interesting series where we just get to go through literally everything that went into this year. And as I said, this team that we're doing here today, the St. George Illawarra Dragons, for mine, is one of the more intriguing on a negative sense, but I feel like there will be a few positives throughout because they are a very up and down team. They are very inconsistent, or they're consistently inconsistent, and that does go through, you know, multiple years, right? That does go through multiple years. So obviously, guys, hit that like button, subscribe if you are new around here. Obviously, get involved in the chat throughout here, and then once this video does finish, please jump into the comment section on the actual video and let me know your thoughts about how the Dragons did go this season and what your thoughts were of the video. So, like I said, thumbs up, subscribe. We'll quickly get into the chat before we do get into the ladder positionings. Oliver says, as a Dragon supporter, I was very pissed when this happened, but I'm very happy to see that heaps of people think that they will get close to the finals next year. I think they'll finish 7th. Well, look, I really don't know how to decipher what the Dragons are next year right now. Obviously, we'll talk more about it in a moment, but I don't think that any prediction for the Dragons... I don't think it's an easy prediction at all. And I haven't been seeing a great deal of people predicting them for the top 8 next year just yet. But that's because we're not even finished this season yet. So you're not going to have a great deal of people coming out and making their entire predictions for next season, especially when we need to see so much. There's still so much to go off. So look, it'll be very, very interesting where people do predict the Dragons for next year. And they haven't really given a great deal of faith to being a consistently decent enough team. team to make the 8? Because, like, for example, in the preseason, I predicted this team for 8th position. I put them in the top 8. I was relatively confident that the signing of Clint Gutherson and Valentine Holmes and even Damien Cook, even though I didn't necessarily agree with that signing, I thought that they had enough there to at least consistently be around where the Raiders and Knights, I guess, have been for a few years, where they've just kind of sat around that 8th and 9th position. And if they're sitting around that position, I'm going to kind of lean with that inkling that maybe they might be able to, with their inclusion of these players. I thought they would be able to just push in, because especially since last year, they were in 11th position and only 2 points out of the 8. The Knights, obviously, I had dropping off quite considerably. I did actually predict the Raiders to be in the same position there. I put the Dolphins lower. So that's why I did have the Dragons for here. They weren't able to do that, obviously. And I think it's because they lost a lot of games in the middle part of the year, or even the early part of the year. They lost a lot of games quite close. I think they were like less than 7 points, which we will talk about when we go through their draw. I feel like that is what happened, and they weren't able to just get that win. They forgot how to actually get past that real crunch period of the game and actually sneak the win. Because a close game still shows that you are competitive, but you're going to see teams like the Panthers get that win. You're going to see teams like the Melbourne Storm, even the Cronulla Sharks in their game where they won, I think it was 12-10 or 14-12 over the Rabbitohs. The Sharks were god-awful, mate. The Sharks were awful in that game. They were really, really poor in that game. But they still found a way to win. And that is what these teams who are in the 8 know how to do. Even when they don't play well, they still find a way to win. And a prime example of this is the Sydney Roosters, absolutely. A prime example of this year for portions was definitely the Sharks. This team, the Brisbane Broncos, have been a great second half team this year. People forget about how poor the Broncos actually were in the first half against the Raiders because their second half was so strong in that back end. The Broncos can make a whole deal of mistakes, but yet they still find a way to actually win the game. And obviously this is a primetime team of the Storm. Raiders in previous years, they've been kind of able to do that, but I think this year they actually won quite a few games by a consistent margin. But this team in the Dragons just doesn't know how to do that, and that's what the biggest letdown was for me in 2025. Mitchell Smith says, can't wait. Olivia says, this is one of the hardest predictions. Hardest predictions? Are you talking about for next year? Yeah, for sure. Yeah, this is a really difficult team to get a read on in general. Mitchell Smith says, yet my Dragon fan friends were constantly so frustrated by the amount of close games they lost. Exactly right. Because that does prove to you right there that they're there, but they're not quite there. They're there, and they're in the conversation, and you want to be in the conversation. The conversation is very important to be a part of, but you want to be on the positive end of that conversation, not the negative end of the conversation. The Titans aren't in the conversation. Neither were the Knights, neither were the Rabbitohs, neither were the Tigers. These teams weren't in a competitive spot to do it, right? So it's not just... People are going to misunderstand the word conversation there because, yeah, you're going to have a lot to talk about and conversate in regards to the Rabbitohs, but we're not talking into the top 8. The same thing with the Titans, the same thing with the Knights. You've got things to talk about, but when you refer to the conversation, I mean a conversation for the top 8 throughout the year. And those teams I just mentioned, you wouldn't have had them there throughout, but then, obviously, the Dragons, you have had them kind of there or thereabouts, but it just dropped off completely. Olivia says, yeah, for next year. Mitchell says, good teams win when they play shit, bad teams can't. Exactly right. But all right, let's get into their ladder this season. So they did finish in 15th position, which was on 22 points. Now, they did finish 4 points clear of the two absolute dribble squad of the Gold Coast Titans and the Knights, who finished on 18 points. They had 2 more wins than them. They were the only team to actually finish on 8 wins this year. The teams in 12th, 13th, and 14th had 1 more win than them. Outside of the top 8, they were a good 5 losses, behind the Roosters. The Roosters had 13 wins alongside the Panthers, and the Dragons, they had 8. So that is a considerable margin there. But if we go back to recent years, so in 2024, the team in third last, they had 7 wins, and the top 8 was on 8th position. 8th position was 12 wins, and the Raiders were on 12 wins there in 9th position. So they were 5 wins behind there as well. So a very similar marker. It's just that this year, both teams, the one on the 8th position and the one in 15th position actually had one more win apiece comparatively to 2024. In 2023, the team in third last was the Bulldogs. They had 7 wins, so one less than the Dragons this year, and the Raiders had 13 wins. So the Raiders in that year, in 8th position, that was 6 wins above the Bulldogs, who had one less than the Dragons did this year, and the Raiders had the same amount as the Roosters did this year. And then you go back to 2022, where it was 14 wins to get into the top 8, which was the Raiders and also the Rabbitohs. They're on 14 wins. And then you go down into third last, which was 6. That's 2 below where the Dragons were this year. 8 wins for the Dragons would have got them into 12th position this time around, but 6 wins, that was 8 behind. So, look, overall, this shows that this whole section of the competition this year was a lot better than the majority of what we've watched across the last couple of years. Actually, just to kind of go back over the 5th year there, Broncos had 7 wins in 2021, and the Titans had 10 wins, which was a very disappointing year overall for this kind of whole section of the table, because the Titans, the Sharks, and the Raiders all finished on 10 wins, which is a losing record with the 14 losses there for all 3 of those teams. But they had 10 wins. So that was only a 3-win gap between these two. So that was a very disappointing year overall for anyone out from pretty much 7th downwards, but specifically 8th downwards. So the point of the matter is that the quality this year has proven to be a lot better. Overall, it has been a lot better. This is quite similar to 2024? No, it was 7-12. Yeah, 7-12. So last year was still a very similar gap. It was just a 1 less win for both those teams. So that is basically saying that the Dragons in recent years probably would have finished a little bit higher than where they did actually come this year. It's just that this was so tight overall. Now, they had 16 losses, which is absolutely dramatic there, but 498 points were scored. Now, I don't even know how to explain this St. George Illawarra Dragons team this year like just off of your eye test and seeing how the Dragons played. They were very odd. You know, I feel like we nearly even need to go through their draw before we get into the ladder just to explain these points for and against, because they were very odd in a lot of ways, where they did have a lot of attacking 4-8 points, but they also were really awkward as well throughout, where it wouldn't kind of come in bang, bang, energetic slap-ups. It was just kind of getting through the motions, but also there was just some real energy about it at times too. It's a really awkward team to talk about. So 498 points is below the Titans there on 520. They were better than the Knights on 338. Obviously, everyone was better than the Knights this year attacking-wise. So they're better than the Knights. They were better than the Rabbitohs at 427. They were better than the Tigers on 477. And that's actually it. So the Dragons actually finished in 4th last for attack this year, which is quite, you know, it's quite weird, because I don't know how to explain it. This team has attacking options, but it realistically will get into the halves in a second, but it realistically will come down to the halves, the aging hooker that they actually did sign, and Damien Cook, Gutherson not exactly being an X factor. Maybe this just shows that they didn't actually have a great deal of X factor overall, because 498 being 4th last, I absolutely would have expected them to be more so around the 550 range this year, which is up around where Manly sat at 555. Forget about the Dolphins. They had an incredible year. You know, up around where the Panthers here at 576, which was actually would have been better than 550, would have been better than the Warriors, and it also would have been better than the Bulldogs. I expected the Dragons to probably sit around that 550 range, but 498 and being in 4th last there to finish behind the Titans is very disappointing for them. Even so much to say the Eels, who really struggled for points for a large bulk portion of this season at 502. They still finished 4 points behind them. Really disappointing if you can't at least get to that 500 mark. The 500 mark is not necessarily a pass. I'd probably say 550 would be the pass. And that's why I had the Dragons in 8th position, because I thought that they'd probably get around that 550, which would be a pass mark. So really disappointing. Comparatively to their last year in 2024, they scored 508. So actually not too heavily of a difference there. Not too heavily of a difference. It's only 10 points that separated their 2025 season attacking-wise to their 2024 season attacking-wise, but yet they were able to finish in 11th position here, which I feel like would have been a very, I think that kind of would have been the Dragons season off the eye test, that's where I probably would have had them, which makes a lot of sense now in regards to the very similar attacks there. I think that third last is pretty harsh, but 11th would have made a lot more sense to mine. So 10 points separating, that means their attack has gone just slightly downwards, but pretty similar. Then you go back to 2023, where they actually finished in second last, they had 474, so 24 points less. So at the very minimum, they've actually improved on their attack from 2023 both times, in 2024 and 2025. Not by a significant margin, but by a pretty decent enough margin of 24 points this year, and last year it was 34 points. So an entire game score improvement, but again, only that one extra spot up. And then you go back to 2022, where the Dragons, they finish on 10. In 10th position, but they had 469. Do you see what I mean when this team is so awkward? 469 back then was... That in 10th position is worse. That in 10th position of 469 is worse than they had when they were the 16th place Dragons in 2023. So how do you get a read of what this team is doing? You know, is there a positive trajectory or is there a negative trajectory here? It's so confusing. 469 into 474 into 508 back down to 498. So they were down, then they slightly went up but finished way lower, and then they went up and finished way higher, and then they went slightly down and finished way lower. Now you're starting to understand why it's so confusing to talk about this team, because there's no consistency across these seasons to show any form of actual trajectory. And then we go back to 2021, which was obviously 5 seasons ago. They scored 474. They scored 474. What is this team? Attacking-wise, they have pretty much stalled around the same point, but they've mixed up from 10th, 11th, third last, second last throughout. What is this attacking team? And again, you've got to remember that this year, coming into this year, they signed a ex-Origin Australian hooker, I think Gutho's played Origin, yes, so Origin fullback, and very good fullback at that, who had a great year, an Origin and Australian international, an ex-Origin player here. Like, this team has no excuses to kind of be still stalling around the same point that they were back in 2021, where they only still finished 28 more points above. So again, to recap, 2021 they scored 474 points. 2022 they scored 469 points, so a negative year. 2023 they scored 474, which is... where are they here? Yeah, so is a positive. And then 2024 here, they go and get 508, which is a decent enough positive that at least clocks the 500 barrier. And they go back down below the 500 barrier to 498. So their attack shows really odd signs. Odd signs that just there's something incorrect with the way that they're actually attacking. There is something incorrect with their attacking structure, because it is relatively consistently bad. It is relatively consistently bad. Even 508, which was their highest in the last 5 years, 508 would have only been better than the Knights, the Dragons this year, if they take away the Dragons this year, the Knights, the Rabbitohs, the Tigers, the Eels. They would still have been 5th last across this season, and across their 5 last seasons, they still would have been in 5th last position this year. So clearly, the attack is a significant problem. It is a significant problem when you really delve deep into that. And again, as I've said, they're very awkward, but that's even more awkward than I thought. And then we move across here to, and actually, let's just quickly comparison. So 498 points this year for 15th. Last year, 15th got 561. So the Dragons were well below the Eels of last year by about 60 odd, 63, I think it is. And then you go back here to the Bulldogs, 438. So they had about 50 50, 60 odd better than the Bulldogs in 2023. The Knights were 372 here. Geez, the Knights have been really poor attacking wise for a long time now, but 372. And then you go back here, Broncos at 446. So they did beat out 3 of the last 4 third last teams. It's just that last year's Eels had way more points in comparison to what they had. So yeah, attacking wise, major issue. And considering they have made adjustments, makes it even more confusing. Olivia says, yeah, for next year. Nico Hines says, sucks for them. Well, they did beat you, Nico Hines. Entertainer says, 10 people here must be all the Dragons fans for 2026. Yeah, well, look, it's the Dragons obviously aren't exactly a team that a great deal of people would have been excited to be watching for a majority of this year. So it is what it is, man. But look, let's move on to the defense now. Let's move on to the defense. 628 points against them this year. So it was better than quite a few, not a heap of teams, but it was still better than a few others. So the Titans obviously were the worst. The Knights they finished up worse than them. No, so the Tigers had a better defense than them. The Cowboys had a worse defense than them. So no, actually speaking, they did finish in 5th last. So very similar team, this Dragons team, to what the Titans did last year. So the Dragons were the 4th worst attack, but they were also the 5th worst defense. The Titans last year in 4th last were the 4th worst attack and the 4th worst defense. And now the Dragons have taken a pretty similar margin there, where not all the time are you going to see a team that finishes pretty much in that spot have that equalization between the attack and also the defense. Like, for example, the Titans with 520 was better than quite a few teams, even some teams attacking-wise in the top 8, specifically the Warriors. So that does link up there with the Dragons, as the Titans did last year. But 628 points is obviously pretty damn well rough if you're cracking that 600 marker. To get into the top 8 this year, defensively, 521. So that is a whole 100 points less. That was the worst top 8 record defensively from the Sydney Roosters. And you know, considering the Dolphins and their fall off, the Dragons were still 30 to 40 odd behind where the Dolphins did finish up there. So the Dragons defensively over the last couple of years, 628 this year. Last year they were at 634. So they actually gave up more points last year, despite the fact they finished in 11th position. 11th position, they actually finished with more points against them. And again, this is why it's strange. More points against them and only 10 more points scored, but yet a big switch up from 15th to 11th. And that's why I think this would have been probably a bit more of a fair valuation for them on the ladder. But 634 for them last year, so it was a better defensive year for them, actually, in 2025. And then we go to the Dragons there with 673 against them in 2023. So, again, the Dragons had a better defense this year. A decently better defense by about 40 odd. The Dragons here 569s. They obviously didn't crack that 600 barrier. That was their best year defensively, but their attacking numbers were absolutely woeful. But 569. So again, another awkward stat here where there just is a fluctuation overall. And then you go back to 2021 where they had 616 points. So the comparison of 498 on the attack is only 28 better than they were 4 years ago. And to where they were 4 years ago, they're at 616, which is only 12 points better defensively than where they're at now. So they've actually dropped off since then too. So if you want to do a 5-year kind of recap on this Dragons team, they've only improved 24 points on the attack, but they've also regressed 12 points on the defense and dropped from 11th to 14th. Wow, this is an awkward team. This is an awkward team. Yeah. This is an awkward team, dude. There's no improvement. There's no like significant enough improvement to tell us like what they're actually going to do going forward. When we're talking about a prediction for next year, right this very second, I'm assuming they're going to finish anywhere between 15th and 11th. Because there's nothing else that will tell me that they've done enough that'll take them into a top 8 position here, and there's nothing that really tells me they're going to finish in last. It just seems like this team is the definition of purgatory right now, where they can't seem to get out of just a middling area of purgatory where it's not as exciting as just edging the top 8, but it's also not as bad as finishing a dead last position where they finish 4 points above. So their attacking and defensive numbers there for a -130. Recently speaking, the Dragons had -126, basically no improvement on last year. -199, so a little bit better than then, which is only one spot lower. Here was -100, so not a here we go. Not a huge difference, but still 30. And then here they had -142. From 2021 to 2025, this team has not changed. This team has just simply not changed. And that's an interesting thing that Davo just said there in regards to, do you reckon they never replace Ben Hunt? Yeah, but the thing is, right, is that based off of the numbers that I'm telling you right now, what did Ben Hunt really provide them there? What's the difference between Ben Hunt when he was at the Dragons to Ben Hunt when now he's not at the Dragons? They haven't done anything differently. You know, yes, sure, they finish in 14th position or 15th position rather than in 11th position, which is where they finished last year. So, sure, you can switch up 5 negative, but that's because this area of the competition has been a lot better this year overall, and it was super close, and they've just done nothing that it's not improved in 5 years. It's the same team they had in 2021, and that's gone from Hunt to what they have now. So there's no difference. It's not even about replacing Hunt. It's about understanding what is doing. What is doing here. So I think that's enough there in regards to the attack and the defensive stats. But that is it. You know, I said the same word over and over and over again, to be completely honest with you. It's awkward. And then we go to the home record, which was 6-6 this year. So at least they're getting half of their home games, and that is a mixture between Kogarah and Wollongong. It didn't obviously do too well. They would have actually had a winning record if they had won one of their last 4 games in the NRL season. I think they had 3 home games or whatever, and they lost, I believe, all 3 of them actually. So they had a Dragons home game there, Dragons home game there. Well, no, they did actually do pretty well here in that game, those games against the Raiders and the Sharks, which shows you why this team is so consistently inconsistent, because they go from an 18-12 win over first to a 22-14 win over a team that is, you know, in 5th position and in a preliminary final right now, and they go and lose to this team here in the Warriors, who were the most vulnerable team in the top 8, and then lose 40-0 to an injury-ravaged Rabbitohs team that were in the bottom 4 this year and were, I think, in second last or third last at the time. You know, so it just tells you everything you need to know about why this team is the hardest team to predict in the entirety of the competition. But 6-6, I don't believe is an awful record. They had a better record than the Cowboys at home this year. They had a better record than the Tigers did at home this year. They had a similar record to what the Roosters did at home, the Panthers did at home, even though it's not really their home. I don't think that's unacceptable. I think you need to be at least getting half of your home games at the very minimum. 2-10 is really poor away from home. However, that is the worst away record in the competition this year. The worst away record by a decent margin. Even the it's equal with the. No, it's not. It's way worse than what the Knights had. The Knights even had 4-8 away from home. The Titans had 3-9 away from home. The Rabbitohs had 3-9 away from home. The Tigers, the Cowboys infamous for not necessarily travelling away well, 4-8. So the Dragons had the worst away record. So it seems like this was okay and this kind of got them by, but this is what really hurt them in 2025. That really hurt them. You know, because if they could have gotten up to, let's say, let's go and say they get 3 wins away from home to make it 5-8, that would have taken them from 22 points. It still only would have taken them to 28 points, but they would have been back in that 11th position. The 11th position that I've kind of been saying would have been a justified reaction to kind of what this team overall is. So I think this is what really made sure they got into that bottom 4. This isn't necessarily bottom 4 numbers, despite the fact that the Rabbitohs did as well, but this is absolutely deserving of where it is. That is poor stuff. Like I said, it sounds weird, and I know we can only look about 3 years into the future, but I just can't see a world for the rest of the 2020s where the Dragons get out of where they are at. But again, like I've said, I understand where you're coming from. Right now, they are absolutely they are the definition of purgatory. I cannot think of a team more awkwardly placed to understand what this team is going forward for the next 3 years, let alone the next 5 years. Obviously, we are now halfway through the 2020s. You're probably okay to think that on the basis that 2026, 2027, 2028, 2029, so they've actually only got 4 years there. So it's basically 3 years, but it just you can tack that one on. But the reason why I think that it's it's understandable your position there is because the Perth Bears will come in 2027. So it's like if they're looking to improve their halves department, or they're looking to improve their overall team going into the future, well, the Bears are going to be completely on the open market looking for players. I can tell you right now the Titans are. Justin Holbrook's just taken over the Newcastle Knights, so he's going to be going to the market to look what they can do going forward. I guess Jonah Pezzett is a potential option right now. We'll talk about signings and whatnot in a bit. But the point is that we've got the Perth Bears coming in 2027, and then we do have Papua New Guinea lingering around 2028, 2029, 2030. So in that time frame, we may potentially see two teams come in within that 4 years' time. So for us to see the Dragons improve, we need to see them either make signings or to really see adjustments. And right now, there is no near-term or mid-term future that looks likely for them to be able to do that. So right now, I don't think that next year I'd be predicting them outside of that 15 through 11 range. I think they still are potentially in the midst of purgatory here. And it's not like their team is a bunch of young stars. They have aging stars, which is also a major issue there. David says, true that, Olivia, hard to predict where the Dragons will finish next season. Hypothetical, they managed to snare Jonah Pezzett away from the Storm. Does that elevate them higher up? Well, we'll talk about Jonah Pezzett and whatnot and their half situation a little bit later when we get to the contracts and to the players. But of course, Jonah Pezzett is a player that a lot of teams are looking at right now. Teams like the Titans, teams like the Dragons, teams like the Knights. There's even potential for a team like maybe the Eels if they went down that direction alongside Mitchell Moses. I don't know what their cap is looking like. Are we going to see Luke Brooks and I think Manly probably going to be out of the market for it because they've got Luke Brooks, Jamal Fogarty and Joey Walsh, and it's like that would kind of be a bit unnecessary there. And look, do the Raiders still back in Ethan Sanders as much? Maybe do they come in and try and snare Jonah Pezzett? You never know. So look, there's a lot of market surrounding Jonah Pezzett, and I think that the Dragons, their biggest priority is specifically their halves. So it definitely is a good question there. But anyway, that's the ladder, and I think that's fair enough there. If you disagree with anything that I've just said there to kind of wrap up the Dragons and their last 5 seasons, please let me know. I just right this very second. To compare from 2021 to 2025, there has been only 24 points improved on attack, but they, again, have 628. They've given up 12 more points on defense, and the middle stages of that 2021 to 2025 were pretty much around that area. There was no significant improvement at all across defense or attack in those individual seasons, so you just compare and then crunch it in. So the ladder's not great there for the Dragons long term. All right, so let's get rid of that, and now let's move across here to. We'll talk about the contract situation here for the Dragons. So we've got a few long-termers here. Now, they have picked up Daniel Atkinson. Actually, we'll talk about the gains and whatnot. So in 2025, they gained Damien Cook from the Rabbitohs, Clint Gutherson from the Eels, Lachlan Ilias from the Rabbitohs, Valentine Holmes from the Cowboys, Nathan Lawson from the Rugby Sevens, Emro Gula from the Raiders, and David Clement from the West Tigers. This I don't necessarily think panned out in Damien Cook. Look, Damien Cook has been the best hooker in the game at periods of his career, but that period of his career is not now. I think at this point it's pretty obvious that Damien Cook isn't necessarily at all the guy that he once was, and Jacob Little, who was their 9, actually had a pretty decent enough season last year. I was expecting him to be their 9. I never used to originally rate him, but he really came on last year. And then they made this signing of Damien Cook, which I really just didn't understand. And it's like if they did sign him, then I actually probably would have put him into the 14, comparatively speaking, considering he is more of that sprint mentality, that fast play mentality. Whilst that's not necessarily how the Dragons play, if you want to play that style, then you kind of have to go all in on that style. And a lot of this team doesn't represent that style, that energetic style that Damien Cook necessarily feeds off. So I would have preferred to have him come on to impact the game and had Jacob Little, who for mine is a much more consistent, solid hooker nowadays. But that wasn't the way to be. Damien Cook came in, started as the 9, and Little would come off as the 14 and would impact the game quite well. I just think that it would have been a much better switcheroo there. So, look, is Damien Cook a bad signing in 2025? Not necessarily, because it means that you do have some solid depth there in the hooker. But I just don't. I think they're trying to get the last, legs out of an aging Damien Cook there that isn't necessarily going to plan. Clint Gutherson was a fantastic signing. Did kind of fall away later on. Did kind of fall away later on in the year. But overall, Clint Gutherson for mine was an incredible player for them. I think that if it wasn't for a guy like Gutho there throughout the year, they probably actually would have come down there equal last or even maybe last on their own. This team really needed him this year. You know, he is one of the better balanced fullbacks in the competition. You're not going to see X Factor. You're not going to see a whole deal of creativity, but you are going to see a hard worker for the damn well most part. That's what he did at the Eels. That's why he got an Origin gig, and he did that at the Dragons. So I think that was a very good signing here that, although they finished in third last, helped them to get away from probably a spoon without him. Lachlan Ilias obviously didn't pan out there. Valentine Holmes, it was unfortunate that he did an injury midway through the season. I think just after Origin 3 is when he went down injured, or it might have been in Origin 3. I can't remember. It was around that period, and then he went out for the rest of the year. I don't think this is a bad signing. It does create a little bit more intention behind their attack, but at the end of the day, he is a centre. So you need the halves to involve your centres and your wingers. Your halves are the key ones there to create that intention and attack through centres that are so dangerous in Val Holmes, who has done it on a Origin level and also on an international level. So Val Holmes was a good signing. I just don't necessarily believe he completely fits the intention the Dragons are showing recently. And then you got Nathan Lawson, didn't really see much there. Emre Gula, it's like whatever, sure. And then David Clemmer was also a bit of whatever, sure. But they also kind of signed him as a real key figure. As a real key figure there, and like a very similar story here to Damien Cook, and this is why we talk about that age factor and the fact that this Dragons team is getting older, and there's no real excitement there. So if you're going to really go hard in on guys like Gutho, who isn't exactly young, but he isn't exactly old either. Damien Cook, who is on the oldest time frame. Same with kind of Val Holmes, who's getting to the back end of his career. David Clemmer, Emre Gula. These guys, their signings are really just to get experience behind a team that doesn't have the X factor for the experience to benefit. So they're just not really making a great deal of sense overall with their signings here, especially this one. But I think this was a home run in Gutherson, and I think this was also at least third base with Val Holmes, which could have been a home run, but it didn't pan out based off of the hearts of mine. And then you go to the 2025 losses. Now there are some big losses here. Zach Lomax was a huge loss there to the Eels. Not that he had a fantastic season with the Eels, but he was a huge loss. Savelio Tamale, he really came out and was a great player at the Raiders this year. Massive play for them. Jack Bird's a bit, whatever, that's fine. Max Fiane to the Dolphins, that was fine. Tuitavaki to the Lee Leopards, that was fine. Ben Hunt was a big loss for them. But again, as we spoke about their ladder positioning from 2021 to 2025, there is no difference there. So what did Ben Hunt actually do there? Besides the specific ladder positioning of 11th comparatively to 15th, what did Ben Hunt actually contribute to this team on a positive level? If you look at the ladder positions themselves and you go, sure, he improved them 5 spots. But if you actually look at how the team played as a collective, as the team through those years, there was no improvement. So, look, I don't think that, and this needed to happen considering the situation, which we all know about the situation of him wanting to leave to go back to Queensland. It needed to happen, but I don't think it's as big a loss as people will make out. Dan Russell, Warrington, it's a bit of whatever. Manu Brown, also whatever. Marshke, North Sydney Bears, a bit of whatever. Michaeli Ravalawa to the Rabbitohs. Apparently, they're saying here that he's been re-signed to the Dragons. Is this true? I haven't seen anything about this. Michaeli Ravalawa, has he gone back to the Dragons here? Because as you see here, they lost him for this season. Then he got injured at the Rabbitohs, and then now it's got him 2026 gains Ravalawa. I haven't heard about this. Is that true? Can you please let me know in the chat? And then Francis Molo to the Dolphins. Shaw, Tom Eisenhuth, retirement, Shaw, and then Finau Latu to the Dogs. There you go. So there was some big losses, but I don't think that they truly impacted. Oh, okay. So Ravalawa was only a loan to the Rabbits. I didn't even know that. Okay, that's interesting. That's very interesting from the Rabbitohs' perspective, why they felt the need to do that. Unfortunately, he did get injured throughout most of this year too, however. But look, overall, these 2025 losses, there's some big names there, but this wasn't as impactful as you'd be led to believe. And this is a relatively decent enough sized name. It wouldn't have changed the direction of this club. Neither with Francis Molo, neither Dan Russell, neither Fatmana Brown, neither Tuitavaki. Zach Lomax wouldn't have taken them truly too far better. Like, it's not like he would have done too far better. And same with Savelia Tamale, because this is a center and a winger, and this is obviously a guy that was very, forceful with his own opinion about his position and doesn't care about the team. He just cares about where he plays for his own enjoyment. So, and this would have done nothing. So it's not like they overall lost a great deal, in my personal opinion. But they did gain in Gutho and Val Holmes. And then in 2026, they have signed Daniel Atkinson from the Sharks. They've got Mikhail Ravalawa, as we've just found out, back from a loan from the Rabbitohs, and Josh Kerr to the Dolphins. Josh Kerr, I guess, is fine. He originally was at the Dragons. He's fine. Okay, sure. Ravalawa, sure. Daniel Atkinson is a potential big signing here, where he has done some decent work with Cronulla, but because of Cronulla's contract situation with Nico Hines, and also with the fact that Braden Trindle has been playing some really good footy and is Indigenous All-Star and whatnot, Atkinson is kind of only a backup at Cronulla for these two guys. And we have seen Atkinson on his own back for the Sharks actually beat the Melbourne Storm in Melbourne, and he kicked the field goal, I think it was last year in 2024. There is a lot of positive belief about this signing here for the Dragons. There's a lot of positive belief there with Daniel Atkinson, because their biggest issue is their halves of Kyle Flanagan / Lycan King Tagia / Lachlan Ilias. So this signing here has the potential to elevate them from where they are if this is the correct signing, because it is a halves position. There is excitement there from his Sharks days. He has a bit of proven experience there with Cronulla. It's just that he wasn't able to get a long-standing tenure at the Cronulla Sharks because of their situation with Nico and Braden Trindle. So I think this has the potential to be a really good signing. This is like, okay, sure, let's see how he goes, especially coming back from injury. And this is like, okay, sure, fair enough, you've got a prop there. And then in 2026, losses Jonah Glover and Sione Finau. Let me just quickly overlook here. No, there's more. Yeah. Jack DeBellin, Tom Eisenhuth, Sione Finau, Jonah Glover, Finau Latu, Francis Molo, Ben Murdoch-Masila, and Mikhail Ravalawa. But this says 2026 losses. So this is a bit confusing here. NRL.com has Mikhail Ravalawa as a 2026 gain, and we have had Lagan here say that Ravalawa was only on loan to the Rabbits. But then we've got here that on Zero Tackle that Ravalawa is actually off to the Castleford Tigers. So, okay, maybe not. So that's another one. There's only two signings here for the Dragons. There's only two players coming back, and that's Daniel Atkinson and Josh Kerr. Ravalawa is actually off to the Castleford Tigers. Ben Murdoch-Masila is a fine loss. Francis Molo, sure. Finau Alato, sure. Jonah Glover, I'm not even too sure. Sione Finau, okay. Tom Eisenhuth retired. And Jack DeBellin is a massive loss there. That is a massive loss going into next year, because I do think that he is an extremely hard worker. He has gone through the trenches with this club, and he's off to the Parramatta Eels, which I think will benefit them greatly. So that is a big loss there. They haven't necessarily... 2028 to Daniel Atkinson for 3 years from next year, and Jacob Little until 2028. One second. Lagan says, yeah, NRL signings tracker was wrong about Ravalawa. It is still true, though, that he was on a loan. Fair enough. Maybe he wasn't alone, and the Dragons have said, well, we don't necessarily want you back, and then they've released him to, was it Castleford? Yeah, it was Castleford Tigers in the Super League. Nate says, I'd call Josh Kerr a regain. Well, Josh Kerr is definitely a regain, but I'm just saying there's nothing kind of significant there overall, but it is a regain. Would you say that it's a massive signing for the club? I wouldn't necessarily say it's so. We'll see how that one gets going. But yeah, 2028 Atkinson, so at least they've got their potential half there for the next 3 years. I would assume that if anything, I would not be surprised if they keep Flanagan in the 7 and then put Atkinson in the 6. I really wouldn't be surprised with this. Nate J, you're a Dragons fan. Any Dragons fan here, please let me know what you think your halves will be, because Atkinson being signed is a clear intention. They still don't believe in their halves, which is correct. So I would assume that Flanagan does stay that 7 and then Atkinson comes into the 6, because it's not like King Tagia has taken over that 6 role, and Flanagan for mine is super underwhelming. I can see that some games he's okay. Some games he gets a bit of decent going about it, but for the most part, no. And we've seen him play alongside Lachlan Ilias, who I believe is killing it in New South Wales Cup, mind you. And we've also seen him play with King Tungia, and the Dragons are still really faltering on the attack consistently. Well, maybe you would consider putting Atkinson into that 7, but Shane Flanagan is the coach there. Carl Flanagan is his son. Am I saying that's the reason? Not necessarily, but I feel like if you've got a father-son duo, you need to see a significant bad performance on a consistent level for them to obviously see away from the positive belief they're going to have in their son. So I feel like whilst I don't believe he thinks he's being biased towards his son, I feel like there is absolutely a thought process that you're going to have a higher thought processes of your family. And it will mean that you have to see the biggest significant failure of a performance for you to make that big time decision. Lagan says, would Kurt even get a gig in this Dragon side next year? Seems like a New South Wales Cup depth option. Maybe so. Nate says, not a big signing, but DeBellin is a huge loss, and I don't understand why we're letting him go. I believe he wanted to stay as well, which is interesting. I believe he wanted to stay, but the Dragons decided no. Actually, how old is Jack DeBellin? How old is he? So 91. Oh, okay. So 91 is 34 going on 35. Okay, so maybe he might have been wanting a bit too much for his age, potentially. And the Eels have just said, sure. Maybe that's the case. This is just me assuming right now, because I do believe that he did want to stay. I do believe so. Anyway, point is, I think that Atkinson, for mine, I'd put it into the 7. But I think that Shane will probably put Flanagan 7 and Atkinson 6. Jacob Little is signed to 2028. I really like that signing. Again, I thought he should have been your starting hooker. And Damien Cook coming off that 9. I'm not too sure about Cyrus Stanley Trowell, but he's 2027. Gutho is also 2027, so I like that. How old is Gutho getting now, actually? How old is Gutho getting? If we go here, team list, and then we click on Clint Gutherson, how old is he now? Probably around, what, 30, 31? 94. He's actually the same age as me. So 94. So he's, his birthday was the other week. So he is 31 years old. As a fullback, he's probably still got a couple of years left in him. Nothing too dramatic, but he does still have a couple of years left in him. So 2027 does make sense in regards to that contract, absolutely. And then who's the other 2027? Dylan Egan, okay. Carl Flanagan, 2027. You see what I mean? They're not going to get rid of him. They're not going to do it. 2027 right there proves to me they're not going to get rid of him. Nate J says, as for our halves, we need anyone but Carl Flanagan. He's not first-grade material. Yeah, sure, but your coach is Shane Flanagan. He's just not going to drop his son. And especially considering he's signed until 2027. Like King Tagia is 20 till 2027 as well, but can you see a world where he does drop him? I don't think so. And I don't think that King Tagia has done enough to completely lock down that 6 role. So potentially you could just see Atkinson switch straight into the 6. I agree with you. I do believe that Carl Flanagan is a guy that wouldn't get a starting gig at most clubs, at all clubs. I truly don't believe it. Even the Titans, who have gone with Jaden Campbell into the halfback, I still don't believe that he would get a gig there. Because there's still a lot more promise and a lot more future about what Jaden Campbell could potentially provide, but Carl Flanagan has had the Sharks days where he didn't prove it, and then he's had the Roosters days where he didn't prove it, and then now he's here at the Dragons where he hasn't proved it. When are we going to see him prove it? For him to explain, like for us to really see it as a fan base, as a club, as a community in the NRL. This isn't coming from a hatred. Full of hate heart, right? I'm not trying to sit on him like, we do see quite consistently from a lot of Dragons fans and a lot of the NRL community. I'm not doing it because I don't like the guy or I hate the guy. I'm doing it because when I watch his games, and we stream every game from the channel, when I watch his games, he is a big reason as to why the Dragons do struggle. And when you are losing games by close margins, you are going to identify your halfback as a significant problem. And we have been talking about this for a few years now with all of Kyle Flanagan's teams, with all of them, not just this team, with all of them. Mozzie says he might have spoke up about the For baby. Logan says the Aiders are on the players' pro. No, I know. That's why I clicked onto it. Nate says, we'll take Gutho until he's 40-odd. Love the king. No, he's great. If Flanagan doesn't drop his son, we need a new coach because he's clearly favouring his son's complete bullshit. Okay, that's fine. But then what do you do then? Who's the coach in the market that you look for? Also, Shane Flanagan has won a premiership in 2016 with the Sharks. Although, albeit, there is a lot of controversy around how the Sharks did get to that position to win that premiership. It's just a fact. Don't hate me, Sharks fans. It is just a fact. But what do you do then? You're completely going down a completely different direction, and that's fine. But you better hope. But it's like the Titans, I guess. You're comparing yourself to the Titans in a lot of ways there, where Des Hasler has been fantastic in the past. His wasn't around controversy, though. But Des Hasler's been fantastic in the past. It didn't work out in the Gold Coast. I believe it's more of the organisation than Des, but overall, it is what it is. Stats are stats, and they've gotten rid of him. And we've gone for Josh Hannay. Like, do you do that? But it's not like Shane Flanagan has been around for a long time. What, he's been here for 2 years, has he? Is it 2 years now? Give Uncle Des a crack, Nate says. Give Uncle Des a crack. Damn, we've got Desi Hasler being asked to come to the Dragons. Deary me. I think Flanagan would be a great 14 going into 2026, can cover the halves, lock if you need to, and in the back end of 2023, when he was playing New South Wales Cup for the Dogs, he was killing it at hooker. Oh, yeah, I forgot about Dogs as well. Yeah, like, sure, but then, okay, so what are you doing with Jacob Little and Damien Cook? So I would assume that you're saying that Little would be starting in the 9, or are you saying Damien Cook starts in the 9? Because I would disagree with Damien Cook starting in the 9, and then if you're having Flanagan as the 14, then you wouldn't even have Little on the bench there. And if you have Little as the 9 and you have Flanagan as the 14, then you're not even going to have Damien Cook on the bench. It wouldn't really make a great deal of sense. So there's a couple of things that are around that situation that you would need to think about as well. Like I said, but he won't play 14 because of Little. I should have read the next comment there. But what would you do? What would you do considering Atkinson, King Tagia, and Flanagan need to fit into 2 positions? And then if you do decide to go with Flanagan outside of those 2 positions, or even if you go Atkinson outside of those 2 positions, not that I believe that is the right case scenario at all, but maybe Flanagan does that. I don't think King Tagia goes to the 14. But if you go Atkinson or Flanagan into the 14, well then, what happens with Damien Cook and Jacob Little? Because one of them's going to start and then one of them's not needed, because what's the point then? I'm not saying I have him as the 14. I have him in New South Wales Cup. I'm just saying he would be a good 14. Yeah, no, I know that's what you're saying. I'm just saying, what would you suggest? What would be your suggestion for how it would operate if Flanagan was the 14 and was a good 14? How would you piece the 6, 7, and 9, and then you have to drop one of those players? You'd have to drop one of those players, because assuming then you've got King Tagia and Atkinson at the halves, and then you'd have to decipher which one you decide to put as your 9, and then the other one has to get dropped between Jacob Little and Damien Cook. So anyway, that's that conversation. We can continue that throughout, but then we go down to some more, like Pacific Tonga 2027, fine. King Tagia 2027, Moses Sully 2027. Do like Moses Sully. Ryan Couchman, Toby Couchman. We know they're 2027. I haven't seen the utmost quality as Dragons fans like to assert with the Couchman brothers, but they do have their moments for sure. So I don't mind the signings till 2027. Yeah, there's quite a few off contract at the end of this year. Actually, Raymond Fatala-Mariner. It doesn't have him anywhere. Maybe off contract is David Clemmer, William Fafita, Raymond Fatala-Mariner, and Corey Allen. I'd assume these guys are all just going to go. But if they haven't been signed yet, I'd assume they're all probably just off, unless this hasn't been updated or anything like that. Brendan says, Shane Flanagan's reason for signing Josh Kerr is apparently he has the fastest play the ball in the competition. Is that true? That's bullshit. He can barely get up straight, Logan says. Surely not, Brendan. He's slow as. Fastest play the ball in the competition? Surely that's a troll. If I'm wrong here, I'm happy to put my hands up and say, well, shit, that's something that I didn't see. But I feel like that's a bit of a troll, Brendan. I feel like you're taking a piss here. I feel like you're taking the piss. There's plenty of other guys, I'm sure, that are much faster than Josh Kerr in regards to the play the ball. Nate J says, supposedly Cody Ramsey's on his way out. I hope not. It is just so much. Were you here at the beginning, Nate J, when we were talking about the comparison between 2021 and 2025? If not, then definitely go back and have a look at it after we finish this stream. But there's just, this Dragons team is in purgatory. And there's no, from the play of movements this year, last year, the ladder positioning from 2021 to 2025 being 24 points better in attack, but 12 points worse off in defense across a 5-season span, with the middling seasons being pretty much the exact same. There is basically no improvement and there's basically no regression. It is just purgatory for this Dragons team. And right now, the only thing that I can think of from what I've seen as a positive is that signing of Atkinson having the potential to be able to take you out of it, considering what he has done for the Sharks when he has gotten his opportunity. I think you need that to be a home run hit. It needs to be, because you've got an aging roster across the team. You've got some okay guys there that really need to prove themselves. I think it's at this point of their career they need to prove themselves. You've got a lot of duds as well in this team. There's no true X factor. Gutherson's not X factor. You go across this team. Let's look at this back line for starters. Val Holmes does have X factor. He's getting on, but he's got X factor. Tyrell Sloan has X factor, but there is a lot of limitations to his game as well. Sione Finau, Shaw, Nathan Lawson. We haven't even seen him, to be fair. Moses Sully. Yeah, sure, you can say it's a bit of X factor, but it's like the quality, the level of X factor here isn't exactly shining through, except for maybe a Val Holmes. Matthew Feeney, no. Lachlan Ilias, not from what we've seen at the NRL level. Don't even think about that X factor with Kyle Flanagan. Hayden Buchanan, haven't seen enough of, really. Corey Allen, no. Gutho, I wouldn't see him as an X factor. Tuipulotu, sure, you can give that one. And then we go to the forwards. William Feeder, no. Tom Eisenhuth, he's retired anyway. Tubby Couchman, I wouldn't say X Factor. Ryan Couchman, I wouldn't say X Factor. Neither would I say with Raymond Fatalamarina, who's off contract. Haven't seen enough of Sigranis. Michael Mollo, no. Luciano Leilua, maybe so, but I wouldn't put him in that caliber anymore. Like Pacific Tonga, I haven't seen enough personally. Jaden Sewer, sure. I will say he's probably one of the guys who can provide X Factor, but I wouldn't say it's a consistent across his game. Jacob Little is more balanced for mine. Halangahu, haven't necessarily seen enough, but I feel like maybe he could have a bit about him there. Take the balance off. Hamish Stewart, no. Hamasele, no. Emery Gula, no. Dylan Egan, no. David Clemmer, absolutely no. Damien Cook, not anymore. And Blake Laurie, absolutely no. So, yeah, you go across a lot of these players, and you really would be saying no. Jack Bird has a lot of X Factor, does he, Lagan? Jack Bird has a lot of X Factor nowadays, does he? Jack Bird. Is that right? It's really interesting what process you got there, mate. Really interesting. Jack Bird. Is what you're saying, because... Deary me, Logan. Deary me. Jack Bird. You know, this is what we're doing. This is what we're doing here, Logan. This is what we're bringing up Jack Bird in a conversation for X Factor in 2025. This isn't 2016 Cronulla Sharks Jack Bird no more, buddy. No, 2016 Jack Bird no more. Brendan says, I thought the same thing, but he did get a spot in the extended squad in Origin. Yeah, I'm not necessarily saying that he's a bad player. I just don't think this player changes the Dragons. I don't think it changes the Dragons, and it really would confuse the living shit out of me to know that what you just said is a fact, that he has the fastest play the ball in the competition. If that is true, then, you know, God help the NRL. God help the NRL, man. So, yeah, anyway, we've gone across their signings, they've re-signed, their losses. We've gone across all of that. I think now we'll quickly go into their draw for the season and really see where it comes together, because, again, I've said it's pretty harsh where they're finishing 15th, in my personal opinion. Like, you specifically look at these last 3 games and it would make sense, but then again, if you look across their competition on the eye test, doesn't really make a great deal of sense. So we'll get to those 3 games in a second. We'll start at the beginning of the year. Now, they actually competed quite well in this opening matchup against the Bulldogs, where they lost 28-20. They competed quite well, where the Bulldogs still were the better team there. Still, an 8-point loss is a close margin. And then you go here to the Rabbitohs game, where they lost 25-24. Another close game they're losing. So in their first 2 games, they lost by a combined 9 points. 9 points. So this is what you're going to see on a trajectory throughout this season. You are going to see a lot of games that are decided by usually 6 or less, but if you want to say 8 or less, go for it. But to start off your year with 2 close losses, the Bulldogs were predicted. I had them for 6th personally. A lot of other people probably would have had them for the top 4. But either way, top 6, top 4, regardless, the Bulldogs were predicted higher than the Dragons in my book. And I also predicted a healthy Rabbitohs team. A healthy Rabbitohs team, I had them in 7th. So these made sense to me at the start of the season. But it also, at that time, showed to me that they can make these games close, which was the telling sign of a team that it was around that 8th position across the long term of the season. They then have a bye, and then they go and win this game. And this is a massive game here, where they beat the Melbourne Storm 14-8. They have a bit of a bogey thing over the Melbourne Storm in recent years, but that really emphasised the fact that although they lost these opening 2 games here against the Bulldogs and the Rabbitohs, they were still able to mix it with the best and get those big-time wins. But then you knock it down here again with a loss to the Eels 23-22. So their 3 losses in their first 3 losses of the season, they lost by 8, 1, and 1. 8, 1, and 1. 10 points as a total, collectively, of losses across their first 3 losses. Shows how close they were. If they could have if you take out the 8 points because that's past 1 score, if they could have just beaten the Rabbitohs with 1 score or just beaten the Eels with 1 score, that's 4 points. By round 5, that would then justify them going from 22 points, well, the Rabbitohs would drop down to 22, but the Dragons would go up to 26 points. They're already up there in 11th position, equal with the Parramatta Eels. And the Eels, you take 2 points off because one of those was a close win there for them, so they go down to 24. So the Dragons would be in that justified space that I was thinking that off of an eye test position this year, I would have put the Dragons into 11th position. So just those 2 wins alone there would have had them there. Just those 2 wins. But alas, it wasn't to be. And then they go and win against the Titans 38-16, go and beat Manly 20-18. This was a big loss here to the Sydney Roosters, a team that was middling at this point of the year and weren't too great. But then you get another really close loss against the Tigers by 6 points. You get another really close loss here against the Warriors 15-14. So outside of that Roosters game, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 games, in their first 10 games of the season, 5 of them obviously being very close losses by a combined score of 17 in 5 games. If you give these close game wins to the Dragons, and they absolutely had every possibility to win this game, and they also, I believe, came back on 14-0 deficit there to make it 14-14 before the Warriors get the field goal. But if you just give them, if they win those 5 close matches, if they are a close match team, that's 10 points. They're 32 points. Their points differential was really, really poor, so they're probably situated in 9th position. But based off of those opening 10 rounds, if they win their close matches, you remove this Roosters game, and I guess, and you obviously have already given the loss there of the Bulldogs past that 1-score game. It's still 5 wins there, puts them into the category for the top 8. And I guarantee those last 3 games of the season don't go the way they go because they clearly clicked off after that Warriors loss where they lost 14-10. So this is just how their season has gone. Then they go and beat the Broncos 30-26, have a bye, go and beat the Knights 20-6. They go and lose the Dolphins 56-6. So this is where their season has probably started to collapse. I would say that's where the season collapses here for the Dragons. 56-6, and then, yeah, look, overall, that is exactly what I'm going to say, even though there's some more close games here. 56-6 is a good whacking. That's a massive whacking by 60 points. A bit of 2-point penalty, though, AJ and HA. I think they did think this is where it started, didn't it? The old banter with the 2-point. I think that's where it started, no? Did they kick an early penalty here and then miss the conversion? Yeah, they did. Yeah, it was. I remember, Nate. I remember. That's where it all started, that game. So that was the big whacker, and then they they lead 18-0 against the Sharks, and then they lose 30-18. These 2 games here, these 2 games defines the Dragons season for mine. These 2 games is what set up their bad performance in the back half. But again, they'll still have a couple of close losses. So the Dragons go and beat the Eels 34-20, whatever at that time of the year. The Eels hadn't improved yet. But then they go and lose by 4 points to the Raiders. They go and lose by 7 points to the Roosters. They only go and lose by 2 points there to the Bulldogs. Then they go and lose by 6 points to the Cowboys. So that 4-game span against top-tier competition teams. Raiders first, Roosters 8th, Bulldogs 3rd, not necessarily the Cowboys. But again, in that 4-week period, that's 6, 2, so that's 8, 7, so that's 15, 19 points across that 4 weeks is how much they lost by. That's a killer. That is an absolute killer. So right now, we're talking under 8 points. I'm pretty certain it's 10 losses this year. Let's quickly go and clarify that so far. Let's quickly go on. Yeah, so Bulldogs, Rabbitohs. This is under 8 points. Bulldogs, Rabbitohs, Eels, Tigers, Warriors, Raiders, Roosters, Bulldogs, Cowboys. So it's 9, unless I miscounted one. It's either 9 or 10, but either way, it will go with 9 there. That's a lot of close losses by, basically one score. And then after that, 38-32, they go and beat the Raiders and the Sharks, which was absolutely huge. But I also think that this part of the season set them up for failure regardless because they had too much to chase after these 2 losses here. But then they go and beat the Raiders, which was massive. Beat the Sharks, which was massive. So it's starting to prove this Dragons team can finish up where we expected them to be. And they go and lose to the Warriors 14-10, another close game. And I think that's what broke the Dragons. That right there is what broke the Dragons everything. Because then they go on and lose 40-0 to the Rabbitohs, 40-24 to the Manly Sea Eagles, and then 40-20 to the Panthers. So in those last 3 weeks, they gave up 40, 80, 120 points. And in the 3 weeks prior to that, they'd only given up 10, 20, 30, 40 points. So across these 3 weeks, they conceded 40 points in total to first place, to 5th place, and to 6th place. And then you go after that Warriors game, they give up that whole combined total of that 3 weeks in one game to the Rabbitohs, who were in 3rd last at the time, and then to Manly, who weren't even in the top 8 either and were in 10th position, and then to the Panthers, who obviously did finish in 7th position. All 3 of these teams finish higher than all 3 of these teams. All 3 of these collective scores here were against them defensively were each individual score here. That's a crazy stat, actually. That's actually a wild stat to think about. A wild, wild stat to think about. And they were still able to score some 44 points here, which effectively saved their attacking season to at least be 4th last. But, geez, you look across that season, there's just... I think that if this was a blowout, you might not have seen them click off as much as you have here, but it just would have broken your heart to be in another close game where you just couldn't find a way to win. So if I've got 3 games that really define what happened with the Dragons this season, it would have to be... I don't think it's that Eels game, actually. I don't think it is. I think we would probably be looking towards this one, the 56-6 against the Dolphins. Absolutely speaking. Absolutely, that is a key part of the Dragon season. I don't think the Sharks I would include there. This one, where they deserve to win that game. The Dragons were the better team against the Bulldogs. In round 20, the Dragons were the better team against the Bulldogs, and it was the last seconds where the Bulldogs actually won this game. You click onto it. 77th minute was Jethro Renakama. The Dragons were clearly the better team and didn't know how to win it, which proves what the Dragons were in 2025. So far, we've got this game here, 56-6 to the Dolphins, and then we have this game here, where they should have won it, but they didn't in another close loss. And then we move down to the ultimate crux, which is this game, because that's what broke them. And they just absolutely got towed up in those last 3 weeks. And that is the story of the St. George Illawarra Dragons, folks. That is the story of the St. George Illawarra Dragons. So after all of that, going through everything that we have done, I've got you in between 15th and 11th next year. Unless we see Flanagan come in with an intention to play Atkinson in that 7, we need to see an adjustment of the halves. The halves have clearly been the issue. The attack we're going to really recap all of this because we're going to jump off in a moment. 2021, they only improved 24 points on attack since then. They had 474 in 2021. This is 2025 here. And then in 2021, they had 616 points against. And in 2025, they had 628. So they regressed 14 points, but they were 24 points better. It means jack shit. It's the same. And then the signings haven't necessarily changed the context and the intention of what we're seeing from this team. This team is purgatory. This team is just in straight up purgatory, and I feel like their fans need to see something change in their halves. Otherwise, it's going to be the exact same season as we've seen for the last 5 years with the Dragons, who have not been in the finals, as we've just spoken about. They have not been in the finals in that time frame. The last time I think was 2018, if I'm correct, or maybe 2019. But they haven't been in the finals for a while. Obviously, they won the premiership in 2010. But right this very second, this team is not going up a dramatic amount, and this team isn't going down a dramatic amount. They're just there. They're just there. Nate J says, I'm still whacking 50 on us to make the 8, but it's more of a prayer than a possibility. Well, Nate, you're a Dragons fan, mate. You have to have the faith. Obviously, I'm looking at this from an outsider's perspective, and there'll be some Dragons fans out there who will just go, "Oh, you're a Dragons hater." When if you've actually listened to this entire stream and don't just clip it up, you will understand that this isn't from bad intentions. This is just this is literally just reading the stats, reading what we're seeing, and I hope I'm wrong. I hope that Flanagan does play Atkinson and puts him straight in there. I hope that these aging stars do get that last, the last legs of them. You get them going for their last opportunity. I hope that Val Holmes is injury free. That Gutho can keep on moving along. I hope you have a lot more attack and X factor. But it's just based off what we've seen. I can't put you out of 15th through 11th because I would have seen you on your merit this year in 11th, but you're 15th. And there's not been a change from 11th to 15th across that 5-year span. Nate J says, good breakdown, Blaze, mate. You know your stuff, brother. Thanks for the stream. Well, I'll do my best, mate. I don't know, you cheeky freak. Yeah, no, that was the game, the old 2-pointer. The old take the 2-pointer. But there you go, guys. I appreciate you for tuning in. Obviously, that was the St. George Illawarra Dragons. Yesterday, we did the Gold Coast Titans, and on Friday, we already did the Newcastle Knights. If you haven't checked those ones out, please feel free to go and check them out. Tomorrow, guys, be back here, same time. We'll be here for the South Sydney Rabbitohs, which will be a season to talk about plenty of damn well injuries. Plenty of damn well injuries. But they still finished above the Dragons. Sorry, Dragons fans, I've got to point that out there. And don't worry, I've already shut on my team in the Titans before you go, oh, well, you're a Titans fan. How can you talk? Well, I can still talk about what I've seen in the competition, despite the fact that my team's shit. It just means we're all shit together. We're all in this together, son. We're all the dribble squad, the dribble brigade together. But alrighty, guys, thumbs up, subscribe. I'll see you tomorrow for the Rabbitohs. Thursday for the Tigers, and then, gee whiz, a massive weekend of finals. Massive. We'll have the Storm versus Sharks on Friday night, and on Sunday, we will have the Brisbane Broncos versus the Panthers. But alrighty, guys, I'll see you tomorrow. Thanks for watching. Catch you later. See ya.